Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Mismapasion, and the first international break of the women's regular season has unfortunately descended upon us, and before we lament the departure of our club heroes to their respective national duties, let's take a look at all the latest action that took place on match week 5 of the Barclays Women's Super League. Raising the curtain for the weekend's action, we had high-flying Manchester United taking on Brighton at the Amex Stadium in what was a good appetizer that saw both teams really go at each other, with the hosts looking to claim a major scalp against a worthy opponent who were in very fine mettle themselves. The visitors were the brightest of the bunch, and it only took the opening 10 minutes of the game for United to open the scoring with none other than Grace Clinton firing home to give the Red Devils an early lead. United would continue to assert their dominance as they regularly tested their former keeper Bagley, who stood firmly against the onslaught despite some very tricky situations at times, with some even involving point-blank saves against the likes of Miyazawa. The hosts would eventually get themselves into the game, and towards the end of the half would nearly get themselves back on level terms, the shot from close range by Villalma, which was deflected in the end. Brighton's positive growth would soon yield dividends finally in the second half, as ex-United player Nikita Paris would soon head home from a cross to put the Seagulls back on level terms in what was about to become a very grueling match for both teams. As the clock ticked along and time ran out, both teams got more progressively antsy about finding a winner, particularly United, who threw just about everything they could at Brighton, who are now resigned to just hunkering down and weathering the storm to try and see out the game with at least a point to show for their efforts. And indeed, that is how it would end, as despite their best attempts, Manchester United were ultimately unable to break down the vigilant Seaside team, which does unfortunately mean an end to their perfect start to the season, but the Red Devils nevertheless remain unbeaten so far in their WSL campaign. And speaking of unbeaten teams that come from Manchester, our next match of the weekend saw former champions in Manchester City taking on Aston Villa at home in a match that saw recognized versus unfulfilled potential. The game had a lively start with the refreshing paradigm of Manchester City for once not being the team that was all over the opposition, as it was Villa who were quick to try and carve out something positive for themselves early on, and carve out they did indeed, as it was a wonderful attacking pattern that yielded the first goal of the game courtesy of Gabby Nunes, who flicked home with some flair. The Villains did an impressive job of taking the fight to City, who for the third game in a row now were trailing behind their opposition and looking for an out to try and make things level going into the second half, but to no avail, in large part due to the stellar goalkeeping antics of D'Angelo. Unshaken by their poor fortune in the first half, the citizens would nevertheless continue to pluck away at the visitors until fortune finally smiled kindly upon them, as Lauren Hemp conjured a moment of magic for herself to fire her team back into the game, and it would only take the next 8 minutes before Jill Ward was at the receiving end of a good counter-attack to fire the ball viciously into the back of the net to properly announce her return to the WSL after her long injury layoff. Leading for the first time in the game, City asserted themselves properly in the final 20 minutes of the game to see themselves out as worthy 2-1 winners over a tough opponent who gave their unbeaten streak a run for its money, but thankfully for the citizens, it does remain intact. Up next, we had Liverpool hosting Crystal Palace in a game that, in all honesty, I was not too excited to watch going into it, but in the end, I'm really glad that I did, because this was a sleeper hit of a match in my opinion. The Eagles looked to have taken inspiration from Aston Villa as they took the initiative of scoring first, courtesy of Stengel, whose relentlessness put her team deservingly ahead. Palace continued to bring the fight to Liverpool, who gradually grew into the game themselves and eventually were able to wrestle back control of the tie, which was ultimately capitalized on as their consistent and professional pressing eventually forced an error from Riley at the edge of the box, which allowed for Kapoksh, I hope I pronounced that correctly, to coolly slot home to bring her team level going into the second half. The final 45 minutes of the game would follow a ping-pong approach, with Liverpool, of course, getting the slight edge in some key moments which ultimately came to naught, as come the final whistle, both teams would settle for a draw and a point apiece heading into the international break. Following on from this, we had not much of an eventful match in Everton versus Leicester, with a well-worked team goal finished off by Moniki being the biggest highlight of the game, alongside some generally good attacking plays from the home team and the away team in Everton as well, who unfortunately would suffer a 1-0 loss against the Foxes of Leicester. Our penultimate match of the week saw West Ham welcoming their London rivals in Arsenal, with the former looking for their first win in the WSL since, ironically, beating Arsenal at home, whereas the visitors were seeking their second win under René Slegers. The match started off rather slowly as West Ham pulled out Arsenal's kryptonite in the defensive low block and were more than happy to give the Gunners possession of the ball whilst waiting for an opportunity to strike. As a result of this, the game had the expected back and forth you could imagine, with the only really noteworthy moments coming in dribs and drabs, such as Emily Fox making her presence known in the opposition box when she had a chance at goal which proved fruitless in the end, as well as Asei also making herself known to the Arsenal defenders. The game wore on into the final 20 minutes of the game, where there would finally be a reprieve when Mariona Caldente tucked away a penalty to give her side the lead after Stina Blackstenius got brought down in the box. And to top it all off, new signing Rosa Kafaji would put the game to bed with a top corner curler courtesy of Blackstenius to see out Arsenal's second successive win in their new era against a Hammer side that definitely did not disappoint but unfortunately were not the better side, in spite of them giving the opposition a tough game, which the away team will be definitely happy to have come away from with a win. Rounding out the game week and ringing in the beginning of the international break was yet another London derby, this time with Chelsea hosting Tottenham Hotspur, and God bless the visitors, but they were massively out of their depth in this game. The champions did what they do best and they tore Spurs to pieces, as it only took, again, the first 10 minutes of the game for Chelsea to open the scoring after Kaneryd's aura dragged 3 defenders to her sphere of influence, which left youngster Hamano open to put the ball into the net despite the fleeting attempt by Rebecca Spencer to palm it away. Controversy would soon ensue 11 minutes later when Tottenham were given a goal after Nilden lobbed one home, which, although Hampton caught, the linesman claimed to have seen it cross the line, and unfortunately in the WSL, just like VAR, there is no goal line technology, which is honestly quite shocking but not surprising all things considered. But if there were any complaints about the circumstances surrounding the goal, then it definitely was not going to be coming from Spurs or their fans. Unfortunately for Nilden though, she would soon go from hero to zero, as towards the end of the half, a well-taken corner by the home team would come off her head to restore the lead for the Blues. The death bells began to truly toll for Tottenham in the second half as Chelsea and Johanna Ritting Kaneryd and soon step up another gear or two to blow the opposition completely out of the water. The aforementioned Kaneryd would score not one, but 2 undeniably goal of the season contenders, with both of her efforts oozing both class and finesse, especially when you consider that both of them came from very odd angles to the net that honestly most other players would have only dreamt of having go into the back of the net, especially when you consider a lot of luck would be needed for such. In between Kaneryd's goal, or 2 goals in this case, Chelsea would win a penalty that would be saved but scored on the rebound from none other than Baltimore. Soundly defeated but fighting the good fight, Tottenham would score a consolation goal from a direct free kick from Sumanen, which summarized their overall performance in this game. Good, but just not good enough, which is to be expected because it's Chelsea. Come the final whistle, Chelsea would run out deserving winners 5-2 to be the last team remaining to maintain a perfect start to the league. With the conclusion of match week 5, these are the current standings going into the international break, with Man City remaining in first place but only by a point, with Chelsea being their closest rivals who, remember, have a game in hand on the leaders, with Manchester United and Brighton rounding out the rest of the chasing pack. Meanwhile, at the bottom end of the table, Aston Villa, Everton, and last place West Ham all sit comfortably with the worst form in the league, with only goal difference being the separating factor between the 3 sides. Undoubtedly, the game of the week belongs to Chelsea vs Tottenham, with the reasons being valid and plentiful, but above all else, simply because of the glorious individual game that Kaneryd enjoyed on the night. Definitely make time in your schedule to watch it in all its glory. Thank you all so much for having watched this video. If you enjoyed it, then make sure to leave a like and also subscribe for more content just like this, and even share this video if you know someone who enjoyed it just as much as you did, and I will see you in the next one.